Welcome back to another episode of the CHGO Fire Podcast, presented by DraftKings Sportsbook, America's top-rated sportsbook. Download the app and use promo code CHGO when you sign up. I am your host, Alex Campbell, and I am joined today by a co-host with whom I share both a love of Chicago soccer and a last name, but to whom I am not related, at least as far as we know. He's the founder of the Red Line Supporters Group and has been involved in leadership in the Chicago Fire and Red Stars community for a long time. Jake Campbell, thanks for coming on the CHGO Fire Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
Absolutely. So before we get into the soccer, which, yes, unfortunately, we do have to talk about these games from the last couple of weeks, how would you describe, I guess, in the supporters community of Chicago soccer, which has a lot of small groups under the big umbrella of it, what would you say is Red Line's niche within that community?
I would kind of say that we're trying to not have a niche. We're trying to be kind of all-encompassing and open to everybody. So it's not one particular thing you have to be looking for. We're involved in the fire supporters section, we're involved in the red star supporters section. We run a pretty popular pickup game at this point. So we're kind of just the place just trying to improve Chicago soccer.
Makes sense. But also, we're going to bring up a picture of your Twitter bio here. It says you guys are also raccoon enthusiasts. What's the story? What's the story on the raccoons?
The first match day that we had as a group, a raccoon got stuck up on the Cermak stop at the red line, and so we just kind of decided to adopt him as our mascot from there.
Nice. Yeah. I'm gonna show the Twitter header for the show here, for the group here in a second. There it is, and I really do love that the profile picture with the raccoon with the Chicago shades. That is excellent. But enough talk about raccoons. It has been 2 weeks since the last show, which means there are two games to talk about. And Jake, we're going to try to go through this first one relatively quickly. Philadelphia Union 1, Chicago Fire 0. I don't know about you, but going into this game, even though Philly haven't started the year great, a point would have been a phenomenal result here. Would have felt like a win.
Yeah, I agree. Going into the game, it felt like that. I think once we got halfway through, it started feeling like we should be shooting for 3 and not 1. And then, of course, we get none. But I guess that's just the way it goes.
Yeah, so, I mean, to recap a little bit, with all the injuries from week 1, we saw Ezra Hendrickson go with a back 3, a second ever start for Kendall Burks. I know Wyatt Omsberg was injured basically the last 2/3 of last season, but Omsberg's a guy who Fire fans were clamoring to be an MLS All-Star early in the season. What do you make of the fact that we're seeing a rookie, well, it's basically still a rookie in Kendall Burks getting minutes, and so far this year, Wyatt's nowhere to be found, seemingly?
Yeah, I don't know. It seemed like him and Rafa had a good thing going last year. I get why Carlos is getting minutes. I think he's got a lot of potential.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a lot of size. He's playing really well. But Burks over Omsberg in a back 3 does kind of scratch your head a bit.
Yeah, maybe it's because Burks is a little quicker. We've actually seen him kind of play fullback late in games at times, and we will get to that with the Cincinnati game, how maybe subbing in more defenders didn't necessarily help. Other than that in the lineup, it was Fabian Herbers and Gaston Jimenez behind Xherdan Shaqiri in midfield, Shibilko and Kamara together up top. And as you mentioned, it felt like things were going pretty well. This seemed like it was working. And hey, who could have expected that Kasper Shibilko, better in a front 2 than up there by himself, which currently seemed fitting given that this game was in Philadelphia?
Yeah, definitely. He's honestly looked better this season than last. He's still not looking as clinical as we had hoped. Obviously, he had that big miss earlier, a great goal last week, but yeah, he's getting more involved, and I think it's key to Ezra figuring out how the two strike system seemed to really work. Kai Kamara's come in. It's really disappointing to see him out for this last game because
Mm-hmm.
he's showing well so far. So I'd like to see more of that.
Speaking of how Kai was out for the most recent game, you were saying, it felt like the Fire were in a position to get something from this. Fabian Herbers is sent off 5 minutes into the second half, and we've seen this before. This is a familiar feeling. Kai Kamara will later get sent off for just a frustration yellow after the Fire concede the goal, which we'll discuss in a minute. But man, these red cards just feel like they were compounding the mini injury crisis that was already happening. And going into, after these first two games, it's like, okay, half the squad seemingly unavailable already. You can understand the frustration, especially from Kamara, but the wounds just felt self-inflicted in this second game rather than in the first game where it just felt unfortunate with all the injuries.
Yeah, and I'm really trying hard to not believe in us being just a cursed team and that this stuff is inevitable. But they make it difficult sometimes, man. And I wonder, honestly, I kind of wonder whether Ezra should have subbed Herbers off at half. He's kind of a hothead, and going into what was turning into a really chippy game going into half on a yellow, felt like a good time maybe to bring somebody else on. Um, but obviously he didn't, and we got in the hole pretty quick.
Yeah, it's a refrain we've talked
Yeah, it's
about
the
that Pat
frame we
McCraney and
talked
I
about.
last year on this podcast discussed several times, which was that it seems like there are opportunities to give some of those kids on the bench a shot. And this would have been a good circumstance. You're so depleted that, Fabian Herbers is not a guy you want to be starting in a defensive midfield pivot. And when you're in that situation, you're still hanging on 0-0. You feel like maybe that would have been a spot to give somebody a chance there in the middle. The one goal comes in the 90th minute. It's a speculative shot from distance by Philly's Joaquin Torres. Maybe Chris Brady is screened. Yes, the ball bounces right in front of him, but this is just kind of a heartbreaking moment for Chris, who this is his first start after being injured in week one, and it's just really tough to watch that ball just skip by him and to see that 1 point for the Fire literally just go right past them.
Yeah, that was just a straight gut punch. That was and again, it felt like old times. It felt a little bit like some of the similarities between Brady and Gaga, where they're both very talented, but Gaga lost us a couple games last
Mm-hmm.
year as well, with some howlers. So uh everything changed but stayed the same in the same time.
So they lose the game. The roster availability gets worse. You've obviously got a pretty good beat on the general overall mood of the community. What would you say the mood was? How would you describe it? The final whistle blows, and in like the 24 to 48 hours after this loss.
Yeah, just felt like here we go again. And like I said, I'm trying not to get into the curse stuff, but at a certain point, it's got to get broken. These late game fumblings, and that's the only way you can put this stuff to bed. And obviously, didn't happen here.
So again, we're trying to put that game in the past because obviously the bigger talking point of the two games is going to be the draw with Cincinnati. But before we get to that, I've got to remind you that CHGO Fire is brought to you by DraftKings. And as evidenced by last week's DraftKings pick of the week, when I said to bet on Liverpool, who then proceeded to lose to Bournemouth, betting on soccer can be very fickle. But if that's up your alley, DraftKings Sportsbook is the place to do it. They've got lines and markets on just about every league you can think of. The NWSL and the Chicago Red Stars, they start up this weekend if you might be interested in that. Of course, more recently, it's been all about the NCAA tournament. Condolences to anyone who had the Kansas or Purdue men or the Stanford women, but there are still plenty of games to check out on DraftKings Sportsbook. So download the app now and sign up with code CHGO. New customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets instantly only at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA with code CHGO. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details. So, Jake, a game that encompassed the full range of emotions and ended all familiarly in the end. Fire 3, FC Cincinnati 3. You yourself described that Philly game as a gut punch. Man, the gut punch hurts a lot more when you really think you've won the fight.
Yeah, honestly, that was the positive that I took away is I've seen fire teams in the past that don't show the fight, that really don't show like they won it 110%. And that's the positive that came out of this is I loved the way we came to a really strong Philly team in Philly. Didn't look like we were just going in there hoping for a draw. We came out, punched them in the mouth a bit. We lost. That sucks, but there's definitely some positives to that.
Yeah, for sure. So, in the theme of
Yeah,
the
for
NCAA
sure. So
tournament, this was a very much a game of runs, and it started with the Fire, kind of this rearing our heads of, oh no, are they going to just let that last loss get them down? And since he scores in the 8th minute, it's a huge deflection. But the opening 8 minutes of this game, you've said, here we go again. I think we both said it already on this podcast, but man, it's like there was that concern. It's like, oh, are they really just going to let that Philly game stick with them? Are they really just going to let FC Cincinnati kick them while they're down? I don't think we could have foreseen the way things would then turn around in the 20 to 30 minutes after conceding that goal.
yeah, it you could feel it in the supporters section. I mean, for what you could still feel, it was so cold that there wasn't much feeling going on. But the air kind of came out for a little bit when that Cincinnati goal went in, and it definitely felt like okay, here we go. We're at home, and we're just gonna get whooped by a superior team, and so all the positives from last week kind of just looked like they went out the window. That's definitely how it felt at first.
And while you mentioned it, shout out to you and to everybody else who braved the conditions out there on Saturday. I'd initially planned to go with a couple friends, including one who's an FC Cincinnati supporter. And we just looked at that forecast and we're like, you know what sounds way better than this? Staying at home and watching this game. And so, again, huge credit to everybody who went out there in the cold. I think it was the second coldest ever Fire game at Soldier Field. And that is saying something because
Wow.
we've had some doozies over the years. So the Fire were lucky to not be down 2 or 3 within the first half hour of this game. Cincinnati hits the post at one point. They have a goal called back for offside. It's not looking good. And then out of nowhere, you alluded to it earlier, Jake, Kasper Shabilko scores what is easily his best goal for the Fire, a first-time curling finish on an assist from Brian Gutierrez. And there was the glimpse of the player we all know that Kasper can be in the clinical finisher, like you said, that we've seen him be in this league for years.
Yeah, I don't know who needed that more, us or him. Like it's hopefully that's the goal that gets his confidence back, gets him score. I mean, he should have scored that one earlier in the year. He's definitely had some chances. He's connecting a little bit more this year. Hopefully he can get going. I think I've given up hope of him being any sort of golden boot contender or anything. But if he can contribute, he can score double digit goals, help other guys score goals in a strike partnership like we talked about earlier. So that was definitely great for him and for us.
I also think it's worth
I
taking
also
this
think it's
moment to
worth
talk about
taking this.
Brian Gutierrez and his contributions in this game. He starts in the number 10 spot for Xherdan Shaqiri. And though he did end up having a lot of sloppy giveaways later in the game, I really thought he brought a spark. And I guess athleticism is a weird word to use here because Shaqiri is so strong, but the speed and the energy that Gutierrez brings out there, it was a really noticeable difference from the way that Shaqiri tends to play.
Yeah, he's obviously still raw. He's an unfinished product.
Mm-hmm.
He's that final touch, that final decision isn't always there, but you can see it. You can see the thought process. You can see the ambition with what he's doing, the energy he brings, like you said. A lot of that's missing from Shakiri. And we know Shakiri has the talent, but that will, that energy, that really applying himself to every situation, it's kind of lacking. So it's sad to see us doing better with our DP. I think he's still the highest paid player in the league on the
He is
bench, but
currently I want to say he is the He's second or third. I want to say he's third. I know Insigne in Toronto is one, and I feel pretty strongly there's somebody in between the two, but I can't remember off the top of my head who it is. I will have to look that up. But yeah, I mean, he's still making over $8 million a year. And, they had this conversation on the broadcast mid-game. Shout out to friend of the show, Tyler Terrens, who made the point. He's like, no one's doubting what Shaqiri can do with the ball at his feet. From a dead ball situation, you trust him. You know he can just put a ball on a dime from 40 yards, and no one's questioning that. But again, you do see what Guti gives you, not only the energy with the ball, but the pressing he does out of possession. And to your point, you do really say it's like, are we better maybe with the guy making $8 million sitting on the bench? And this is also going to be my once a podcast until it happens mention that U20 World Cup is coming, and Brian Gutierrez, I think, would certainly like to be on that team. That tournament is in May, so he's got a few more games. That roster is going to probably be announced late April, so reasonably, Guti's got about 4 more games to make his case to Mikey Varas and that coaching staff that he should be on that plane. So something to watch for going forward. And then after this goal, Jake, it is suddenly all fire. Between there and the end of the first half, it is all fire. And in the end, they finally get the reward as Chris Mueller's just shoved to the turf. FC Cincinnati players make a big stink about it, despite on replay looked like a pretty obvious penalty. And then with no Shaqiri, Rafa Schihos is the guy who steps up and takes that penalty. And so that was then, it must have just been a huge sigh of relief after the cheering that, the Fire somehow escaped that 45 minutes with the lead.
Yeah, and maybe Rafa should just be the guy. You mentioned how we know we can count on Shaqiri to drop a dime from a set piece. Is that true anymore? I felt like that's what I believed with him coming here, that at minimum we would get that. But I mean, I'm pretty sure he has failed to beat the first man in the corner more times than he's put the ball in a good spot, and it's starting to get really frustrating. And I don't know. That's something I didn't think would just fade at his age. So I don't really know what's going on, but it seems to me like I personally trust Rafa more uh,
Mm-hmm.
at the spot than I do Shaqiri right now.
Yeah, and Rafa he's got this energy and this kind of carefreeness about him that's really refreshing. That just there's just there's a reason this guy walked into the team and was named captain immediately. Like he's just this kind of guy who is magnetic in that particular way. So 2-1 at halftime, feeling pretty good. And then less than 20 seconds into the second half, the Fire are up 3-1. Goal from Chris Mueller. They just come out of the blocks flying in that second half, a thing it feels like we never see this team do. How are you feeling at this point? What was the mood among the frigid supporters at this point? Because this was like the most fun it seemed like I'd seen the Fire having on the field in quite a while.
Yeah, I think it caught most of us off guard. I think half the section didn't even see it. Everybody's just kind of getting settled back in. The half started, like you said, no one's expecting something like this to pop off. So it definitely took us all like by surprise, and now we start feeling like again we see the good things, we see what is possibly changing from the Fire teams of old. Hey, maybe we can rally back, win a game. Maybe home can be a fortress for us. All these words they keep saying that never really materialize. So yeah, we were riding a high there for a second, and honestly, for longer than a second. I lasted for 30, 40 more minutes, right?
Yeah, it did. And over that period, the Fire start making some defensive subs. It's the thing you'd expect a team to do. Let's slow the game down. Let's try to shut up shop. Let's get this 3 points. The one noticeable one being Jonathan Dean, who was signed to this winter, excuse me, from Birmingham Legion of the USL Championship in the second tier, marketed as a wingback, a right wingback, came in from Miguel Navarro and provided some, I would say, noticeably improved defensive solidity down that left side for much of the game. And we'll get to Lucho Acosta's impact as FC Cincinnati made changes down the stretch. But for a while there, I mean, I don't know about you in the stadium, but on TV, it was noticeable that the Fire were more solid looking with Dean on the field.
Yes, I have long been a Miguel Bauer detractor. I don't think he's the guy. I was very excited to see us get that new signing in recently. Dean, just from the level of play he comes from, I honestly didn't have high expectations for him. And when he came on the field, he's small. He was like alarmingly small, and that was kind of shocking at first. But he was very, very solid. He made one particularly great tackle from behind, chased a guy down from a one-on-one. That was it's been a long time since I felt secure on our left side defensively. And
Shout out to Brandon
I
Vincent,
mean,
probably being the last person.
yes, yeah, and he definitely seems like he should contend for the role. I mean, obviously the new guy's gonna have a shot and hopefully contribute, but I mean that was such a good showing that I think he's earned the right to have his name in the hat. You know.
Should mention, yeah, that signing is Alonso Aceves. He's 21 years old, I believe. He's an under 22 initiative signing. He was signed from Pachuca in Mexico, although he played the first half of the season on loan in the Spanish second division. So just to kind of give folks an idea of the level he is coming from. But that job does seem open. We know what Miguel Navarro can do flying with his pace up that wing, but I'm with you defensively. We've already seen a few instances this season where he's leaving quite a bit to be desired. So, the Fire bring on defensive subs. They're looking solid. It's the 84th minute. This is going to be a big win, a big boost. How would you describe emotionally then what happened over the next 4 minutes?
I think at first it was just fear. When they scored that first goal, and you're trying to tell yourself like, no, no, it's just one goal. It was kind of fluky, I mean, perfect position. All right, they got one. They had subbed off their top striker. We're here to settle this thing out. Surely we'll be okay. Trying to believe in all the positives you're seeing. And that second one it was just heartbreaking. I mean, I felt like if we could have got out of that freezing cold night with everybody that was there had a lot of energy, and had that plus the potential, what it looked like for the Philly game for much of it. It felt like if we got the win, that we have some momentum. We would be moving forward with something, feeling pretty good about the team. And you went from all the way up there to straight back down to despair, all just off of 5 6 minutes.
Yeah, the end of this game is a phenomenal advertisement for how good of a player Lucho Acosta is. I don't know why he didn't start this game for Cincinnati. They must have felt that for whatever fitness reason, he only had 20 minutes in him. And boy, did he make the most of that 20 minutes because, yeah, that first goal is just a dime of all dimes. It's Acosta picking his head up, putting the ball just in the absolutely perfect spot. It gets struck home. And no chance for Chris Brady, really in all of this. Like, this is a thing this is just how the sport works. After last week where you're looking at Chris Brady and being like, man, that kid really could have done a lot better and gotten us that point. You then watch this game, you see 3 goals go in. It's like, man, now you just feel awful for him because absolutely none of this was his fault. But this is just the way this sport goes. You mentioned Acosta's unbelievable. Vasquez and Brenner are going to get goals eventually, even though they're not the ones who end up making the difference. Have a game, Junior Moreno. Guy gets 2 and has 1 called back for offside. So, yeah, it's a classic Fire game. It finishes 3-3. And, Jake, I can't help but feel that the Fire and FC Cincinnati, it feels like they've played this game 5 times already in, like, the 4 years that Cincinnati's been in the league. And at this point, I just assume that every single year they will play this exact soccer game until the end of time.
Yeah. My first game watching the Fire versus Cincinnati was that Open Cup game in Cincinnati, and that was a heartbreaker. So I'm pretty tired of this team. I really wanted us to put them to bed here at home. It's frustrating to be here again.
Was actually, I considered going to that. I was living in Ohio at the time. I saw the week before when FC Cincinnati beat the New York Red Bulls. No, excuse me. I was when they beat the Columbus Crew. I was in attendance for that, and maybe either for the best or regrettably, I'm not sure how I look at it. I was not in the stands the following week as they took down the Fire before eventually falling to the New York Red Bulls. That was FC Cincinnati's last year in the USL Championship, and yeah, it's just every game between the two teams ever since has just been total and complete chaos. We will see in what ways the Fire try to break fans' hearts. these next couple weeks, or maybe, finally they will shake that off. We do have some news to talk about, but before we get to that, CHGO Fire is also brought to you by Game Time. And you can make purchases on Game Time through the link in the description of the podcast. Check that out. Game Time is the hottest ticketing site, makes it easier forever to score the best deals on sports, concerts, and shows. Who knows? Maybe you can get a deal on tickets to a Taylor Swift show in Chicago coming up in a couple of months. We know that those tickets are currently the hardest commodity to get on the planet. You're not going to find a better deal this season on tickets for shows like that, or for the Fire, or the Red Stars, who kick off here in the next couple of weeks. It was created by fans, with fans in mind, guaranteeing the lowest prices you will find anywhere. If you love CHGO, you'll love Game Time, and it's a great way to support us by buying tickets through that link in the podcast description. So join over 15 million people who have downloaded the Game Time app and score the best seats to all of your favorite events. Also, before we get to the news, I mentioned that last week I suggested that Liverpool would easily beat Bournemouth and that Mohamed Salah would score. Neither one of those things happened. Liverpool lost 1-0, so we proceed forward with caution. In the MLS, though, St. Louis City, Jake, our neighbors to the south, are somehow 4-0-0 in their first 4 games in the league. They are at Real Salt Lake this weekend. A draw, no bet, meaning for those unfamiliar that if the teams draw, you just get your bet back, is plus 150 if St. Louis wins. So that is quite the value for a team who should be favored in this game, who are 4-0. Or if you want a little bit more security, they are at minus 140 on draw or to win. So that's this week's points bet pick of the week. A couple options there on how you want to bet St. Louis City SC. Before we proceed, though, Jake, what have you made as an observer of a team that stands to become a Fire rival in the years to come? What have you made of St. Louis City's start to life in Major League Soccer?
Yeah, I don't know. It's frustrating seeing the new teams come in and have life right away. I think for a lot of longtime Fire fans, that's kind of the vibe is, we've been waiting for, a decade plus here to get some relevance in a lot of different ways. And a lot of those things are changing and improving, but some of them really haven't materialized yet. So seeing a new team come in that, outside of the whole different conference thing, should be a natural rival for Chicago. To see them just start off like this is it's not fun. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really want to get down there and see a game. I don't know if I can make the U.S. Women's National Team are actually playing there on a Tuesday in April, which is a little random, but might have to look in to see if I can check out a game there. Unfortunately, the Fire don't play in St. Louis this year. We only play them once, and that game is at Soldier Field sometime later this season, which seems very odd, but Major League Soccer and scheduling, what are you gonna do? So the news we have to get to, Jake, is that over the last couple of weeks, the Fire made an announcement that has been very, very a long time coming. They are going to be building a new training facility in the city of Chicago. We've got a graphic we're going to pull up with some of the details of that. It's a 53,000 square foot building is planned, 2.5 hybrid grass pitches, 3 synthetic pitches. That seasonal dome is going to continue to be a part of the equation, and for both the Fire and for rec leagues in the summer and the winter. So you'll see those 3 fields exposed during the summer, domed during the winter. And they're going to try to be getting underway with construction here soon. The press release said this spring, which is, obviously getting right to it. But Jake, given the fact that this is second, third, fourth different time the Fire have tried to make this happen, I guess it's not surprising that they're going to try to get this project moving quickly. What were your initial reactions when you saw this announced, and that this hurdle the team has been trying to clear for what feels like forever seems to have finally been cleared?
Yeah, mixed reactions for sure. Obviously for the Fire from a soccer standpoint, it's great. They need better training facility than SeatGeek, Bridgeview, similarly to how they needed better offices than, being out there. You can't really be a championship club without championship facilities and everything that goes with it. So that's obviously a big positive. I know how hard it is to get land of this size in a city of our size. My brother actually, he's an NYCFC fan. One of his a few faults But he writes for some of their content out there, and he's been on the stadium beat. And so I've watched as they try to get a stadium built in New York City. And it's a lot of the same stuff. It's just there's not a lot of land to go around, and there is typically a wealth of politicians that are looking to get their cut and looking to have it benefit them or whatnot. So it's difficult to achieve. So it's from that standpoint, it's an achievement for the team. Um, but then obviously the mix of it is seeing that this was old housing, more just promises not fulfilled by the city. It feels bad from a city's perspective that this is where it ended up. We spent a lot of time internally in Redline kind of looking at this and wondering if this is something that we should be vocal against or anything like that. And it really came down to it seems like this is about as good as it can come right now in the state of things for the city, which is unfortunate. It seems like the bad decisions were made a long time ago. Promises weren't fulfilled a long time ago, and we're at a point where it seems difficult to find in the budget and in the political will to get the housing promise built. So I think now at this point it's just on the team to make sure that they really materialize the promises for the benefit of the community. It from what they say, it sounds good. It sounds like they're going to be a good community partner and they're going to contribute a lot. They got to back that up with action. There are people in the community there that say they're very very much for it, but it's hard to go off of anecdotes like that. You can always find people that will publicly back things. There are definitely people in the community that still do not want it there. So at this point, they're going to have to prove to a lot of people in that community with their actions and how it's going to benefit them.
Yeah, and to your point, they've been trying to do this for a while. I think it's been one of those things where, I think there was a facility in Belmont Cragen a couple of years ago that there were renderings for. They did everything. They said, here's this thing we're planning, and then it didn't clear the necessary political hurdles. So my guess is this has been in the works for a while, and the Fire did not want the same thing to happen again, where they get everybody's hopes up and then a project comes crashing down. Yeah, so this land was purchased from the Chicago Housing Authority. It was the former site of the ABLA homes, the ABLA homes, which were mostly demolished in 2007. To your point about mistakes being made a long time ago and promises not fulfilled, at the time it was promised that that land would be redeveloped into, I think, 2,500 affordable housing units. Instead, it has been used for various rec sports purposes. It's kind of a park, kind of not, kind of empty land. So you talked about, though, the club has made some promises that they're going to have to keep up their end of the deal. What they've said is that they're going to invest $8 million into rehabbing existing Chicago Housing Authority housing and creating new community spaces. They've said they will, quote, provide long-term employment for community members, resources for minority and women-owned businesses, free sports programming for local youth, community green spaces, and more, end quote. The big dubious political number that comes in here is that the city says this is going to generate $40 million for the CHA over the next 40 years, which is an impossibly long timeline to ever keep actual tabs on or be able to measure. So to me, it feels like the Fire holding up their end of the deal money-wise has a higher probability of happening than the city and the local residents actually getting $40 million for housing out of it. So, yes, it is a bit fraught, but to your point, it does feel like in the grand scheme of things, it's hard to really find something that's going to be less fraught. Again, this is a better location physically than Belmont Cragen would have been for the team. It's about a 10-minute drive to Soldier Field. It's adjacent to UIC, which is kind of funny, currently has the best soccer field in Metro Chicago. The best soccer grass surface in this city is going to be down the street at UIC. So it is fitting that Little Italy is going to keep its monopoly on great professional quality fields. It's where the U.S. national team trains when they play in Chicago, the men and the women. They train at UIC because it is better than any field out in Bridgeview. It is better than the Soldier Field field. Somebody asked in the chat, what's going to happen to their current facility in Bridgeview? That's really the $1 million question. We've mentioned it on the show before that the Red Stars, they do still play there. The Red Stars still train there. The lease, though, that Joe Mansueto renegotiated with the city of Bridgeview to basically take the lease from, I think, 10 years to 5 by increasing the team's mortgage payment, basically, to get out faster. That ends either after this year or after next year. So there's this looming question, what happens to that facility? What happens to the Red Stars? The Red Stars are reportedly on the brink of being sold, according to NWSL Commissioner Jessica Berman yesterday in a media conference. So if you're a Chicago soccer fan, keep an eye on that. And the fate of the Bridgeview site and of SeatGeek Stadium largely hangs in the balance of all of that. We've actually got a video of the rendering of the facility that the club posted online that, as we continue this conversation, we can kind of show what we're looking at here. And, it is a, state-of-the-art looking facility. You mentioned, Jake, that the facilities in Bridgeview are not up to snuff for this level. It's hard to exactly measure them, but it has been suggested that the Fire may currently have the worst training facilities in all of Major League Soccer. There are a couple teams that are down there in that conversation with them, but they certainly have a right to be in that conversation. So yeah, I guess we'll wait and see. But clearly, it's the Fire have been trying to move political will on a few things for a few years, and it's an interesting time for the city. There's a mayoral election, so there's a lot of unknowns with Soldier Field. So I'm sure the club is glad to have this piece of their puzzle seemingly settled.
Yeah, I agree. And it's really just the ball's in their court now. It is a great place to do a lot of good if you can do so and if you have the will to do so. So I think they can win over community members and be a good partner. And they also cannot. So it's up to them. I do have a lot more faith in this current administration doing good with this than I do past administration. So I think there is reason to be optimistic, but it really that comes down to the people in that community to determine whether it's working or not.
It's also helpful when you have an owner who actually has spent his entire adult life living in the city and is familiar with the city and is local physically and is around and, what's the saying that like 75% of leadership is showing up? And so there is, to your point about changing administrations, instead of an owner who's a couple thousand miles away and no one had seen or heard from often ever, Joe Mansueto does certainly seem to have his fingerprints on the goings on more, and the investment behind the scenes in terms of staffing and all of that has certainly reflected that. So yeah, the all we can do, I suppose, now at this point is, fans can hold the club to it, hold them to their promises over the coming years. We can see how this training facility shakes out, given that they're looking to start construction immediately. The club has declined any further comment at this time. I would love to have that conversation with all of the, kind of various stakeholders. A sort of round table of sorts would be really cool at some point, but I'd imagine this could be ready as soon. Some of it's going to be ready next year, I'd have to think. I mean, even if the building isn't done, getting a couple soccer fields built and installed doesn't take very long. So this is something that could provide dividends for the Fire sooner rather than later. And as I mentioned, better training facilities is great for attracting international teams and tournaments and things of that nature. And, summer preseason, if you're going to have 5 full-sized fields that can be used for a whole host of things. So this is also going to generate money and eyeballs for the team as a total side thing from the benefits to the Fire themselves. This is the sort of facility that the city of Chicago at present does not have. As we've discussed on this show, an absolutely soccer mad city, even if that might not always be reflected in the buzz around its professional teams. So hopefully, the hope is that despite the negative legacy of how this land has been left the last 15 years, hopefully the Fire can take advantage of the position that they are in to make it a space that they use for the benefit of more than just the team they're putting out at Soldier Field every weekend. But certainly to all of you listening, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this project, on the pros, the cons, and hopefully in a couple of weeks I can revisit some of those comments and see what the buzz of the Fire community is. And so, between now and then, we'll also have a couple of games The Fire take on Inter Miami on the road, and then DC United at home. Talk about a game that, I don't know about you, Jake, that's got have to win all over it, even if the Fire aren't going to be a playoff team this year. You can't lose to DC United.
Yeah, I agree. And honestly, the Fire have to be a playoff team this year. If they're not, then a lot of people got to go.
Well, it's a contract year for a whole lot of people, so it does seem like the rubber is going to likely meet the road one way or the other. Jake Campbell, thanks so much for coming on the show today, for taking the time, for adding your perspective as someone really plugged in to the Fire community. Where can people find you and the stuff you're doing?
Redlinesg.com or at the RedlineSG on socials. We're at Horner Park for pickup every Sunday from 10 to noon. We've made a partnership with Half Acre, so we got a couple Half Acre kegs at every tailgate, Fire and Red Stars. And we meet there every Thursday from 6 to 9 to paint and plot.
I like that. Yeah, Red Star season opener is April 1st. This, I believe, is the season home opener. They're on the road in San Diego this weekend. San Diego's going to set another NWSL attendance record in that season opener against the Red Stars. It looks like they're going to sell out Snapdragon Stadium in San Diego, which is just crazy. So tune into that. If you're a Chicago soccer fan, again, the Fire take on Inter Miami on Saturday. That is at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. So for Jake Campbell, I am Alex Campbell. Shout out to Sarah behind the scenes for making it all happen. Thanks for tuning in to CHGO Fire, and I will see you in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, guys.